You've heard it your whole life. Renting is throwing money away. Every month you pay rent, you're building nothing. Every mortgage payment builds equity. It's the most repeated piece of financial advice in America. It's also one of the most misleading. And the organization most responsible for spreading it is the same one that makes money every time you buy a home. The National Association of Realtors has 1.5 million members and spent over $84 million on lobbying in 2023 alone, making it one of the most powerful trade organizations in the country. Its entire business model depends on transaction volume, meaning it profits every time a home is bought or sold. The message that renting is financially irresponsible has been its single most effective marketing tool for over a century, but the math doesn't always support the message. Whether buying beats renting financially depends on factors that real estate agents have every incentive not to explain clearly. How long you stay, what you do with the money you're not putting into a down payment, and what the full cost of ownership actually is, not just the mortgage. Here's the complete picture. The most common mistake people make when comparing renting and buying is comparing monthly rent to monthly mortgage payment. That's not the right comparison. The actual cost of homeownership includes the mortgage, yes, but also property taxes, homeowners insurance, maintenance and repairs, HOA fees where applicable, and closing costs on both purchase and eventual sale. Financial planners typically estimate that maintenance alone runs 1% to 2% of a home's value per year. On a $400,000 home, that's $4,000 to $8,000 annually. Costs that renters simply don't carry. Add property taxes, which average 1.1% of home value nationally, according to the Tax Foundation, and insurance, and the real monthly cost of owning a $400,000 home is often $800 to $1,500 more per month than the mortgage payment alone. Closing costs add another layer. Buyers typically pay 2% to 5% of the purchase price upfront. On a $400,000 home, that's $8,000 to $20,000 that disappears on day one before any equity is built. When you eventually sell, commissions and fees take another significant cut. Here's the factor that changes the entire calculation. Opportunity cost. When you buy a $400,000 home, you're typically putting down 20%. That's $80,000. That $80,000 does not sit in a savings account earning interest. It goes into a house. If instead, you rented and invested that $80,000 in a diversified index fund at a 7% average annual return, you'd have roughly $160,000 after 10 years. That's the real comparison. Not rent versus mortgage, but your down payment compounding in the market versus sitting as equity in one illiquid asset. A renter who invests the difference between their rent payment and what equivalent mortgage and ownership costs would be often builds comparable or greater wealth over 5 to 10-year windows, particularly in high price-to-rent cities. The Money Guy financial research team, modeling 2025 to 2026 market conditions, found that renting came out ahead of buying by approximately $120,000 over a decade when the renter invested the difference. The most common counterargument is the wealth gap statistic. Homeowners have a median net worth of $430,000, while renters have a median net worth of just $10,000, according to Federal Reserve data. That gap is real, but it's being used to make a causal argument from a correlation. The wealth gap exists largely because of who can afford to buy in the first place. Homeowners tend to be older, higher income, more financially stable, and have had decades to accumulate assets. Renters include recent college graduates, recent immigrants, low-income households, and people in cities with stratospheric home prices. Comparing their net worths and concluding that homeownership causes wealth is like observing that people who own yachts are wealthier than people who don't, and concluding that buying a yacht builds wealth. It's a selection effect, not a causal relationship. The tax code reinforces this distortion. The mortgage interest deduction costs the federal government roughly $25 to $34 billion per year. According to the Tax Policy Center, only about 8% of households actually benefit from it, and about 75% of the benefit flows to households earning over $200,000 annually. The policy was framed as a tool to help middle-class families achieve homeownership. The data shows it primarily subsidizes large mortgages held by wealthy households. Here's the framework. The rent versus buy decision is not a moral question. It is a math question. And the math depends on three variables that nobody calculates for you at a real estate open house. First, your timeline. Buying only beats renting financially when you stay long enough for equity to offset transaction costs and ownership expenses. In the current market, that break-even point is 5 to 7 years in most markets. If there's a real chance you'll move in under 5 years, for career, relationship, or life reasons, the math almost always favors renting. Second, your local price-to-rent ratio. Divide the home's purchase price by the annual rent for a comparable property. A ratio below 15 generally favors buying. A ratio above 20 generally favors renting. Most major U.S. metros are currently above 20. If yours is 25 or 30, you are paying a massive premium for the privilege of ownership that requires a decade or more to recoup. Third, what you actually do with the money you're not spending. The math that makes renting viable only works if you invest the difference. Renting and spending the savings is worse than buying. Renting and investing the savings can be comparable to or better than buying, depending on the market and timeline. Homeownership can absolutely be the right financial decision. If you're staying for 10 plus years, if your local price-to-rent ratio is favorable, if you have a stable income and a fully funded emergency fund, buying can build significant wealth. The argument isn't that renting is always better. The argument is that the choice deserves honest math, not a slogan created by an industry that earns a commission either way. 3 things you can do before making this decision. First, use the New York Times rent versus buy calculator. It's free and factors in opportunity cost, local taxes, appreciation assumptions, and investment returns. It's the most honest, publicly available tool for this decision. Link in the description. Second, look up your local price-to-rent ratio before making any decision. Zillow and Redfin both publish this data by metro area. If your ratio is above 20, the burden of proof falls on buying, not renting. Third, if you decide to rent, open a brokerage account and set up an automatic investment for at least the difference between what you pay in rent and what ownership would cost. The math only works if you actually do this. This video is educational content, not financial advice. Your specific situation, income, local market, and goals matter. Run the numbers for your city, your timeline, and your financial situation before making any decision. Next week, why homes got so expensive in the first place, zoning laws, investor purchases, supply constraints, and the political forces that have made housing unaffordable for an entire generation. Subscribe so you don't miss it. 1 video a week, no filler.